Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the recruiting update from this past weekend and the past week really. Tennessee and Auburn have been doing absolute work on the recruiting trail and are definitely building up some really remarkable classes in the 2025 class. But let's get into a little bit of a headline catch up. We do this kind of sporadically throughout the next little bit to kind of get you updated on all of the headlines that you need to know, and there are quite a few that we need to break down today. And it starts with Ra Thomas, definitely the biggest story in the sport right now. And it's a story that has been going on for quite some time at UGA. It is yet another arrest at UGA. Ra Thomas was arrested on Friday morning with one count of second-degree cruelty to to children, a felony, and 2 counts of battery, both misdemeanors. All 3 were tagged with family violence, which essentially just means they were all involved with his family in one form or another. So he has been suspended indefinitely from the team. The details of the incident have not come out clearly, so I don't want to speak on this incident overall. I don't necessarily want to do anything that, puts me in a bad spot. Let's just put it that way. I definitely think this is a very serious issue, of course, and definitely will be very interesting to see how it's handled going forward. But he has been suspended, and we'll see what happens in the case going forward. But I've done my whole spiel on Georgia and all of the different things that have been happening over there, and a number of different things that I think might be able to kind of get them on the other side. But overall, I've talked about, all of the things that Kirby Smart has done. He has, kicked a guy off the team in Daniel David Sensenbaugh. He has, suspended players from the team like Ra Thomas, among others in the past. He has fined these kids with NIL money. He has brought in people to speak to them, done defensive driving classes, has done X, Y, and Z, and it's not working. That's just plain and simple. You can do a million different things. If they're not working, it doesn't necessarily matter, right? And this is obviously a very, very different situation than any of the other ones. Obviously, you can't necessarily draw a line between this and all of the different, traffic violations that have happened. It doesn't change that there is a problem at UGA. It doesn't change that there is an issue there that needs to be dealt with one way or the other. And over the last 18 months, it's been absolutely ridiculous what's been happening up there. There's no two ways about that. And although I do think they've been doing quite a bit to try to kind of quell this issue and make sure that it doesn't continue, it's continued, and you have to deal with it one way or the other. I've talked about this before. I tend to believe that at this point, it's got to fall on the players at some point. I think they have to be more vocal. I don't necessarily know that they haven't, but they got to at least be a little bit more vocal outwardly. Maybe just do something that maybe it makes you a little bit uncomfortable to call out your teammates. Maybe it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable to, quote-unquote, scold your teammates. But this is the reality of your program. If you're going to save this program, if you're not going to be kind of an afterthought or one that you look back on and say, man, there was a lot of promise there, but off the field issues got in the way, something has to change. That's just the reality, and it's got to change pretty quickly. So this is obviously going to be something that is going to be really interesting to watch as it kind of unfolds. Obviously, we will give you updates as the Ra Thomas case kind of unfolds and what UGA does on the other side. I tend to believe he has played his last snap as a UGA Bulldog, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in that case and see how it's handled from the UGA side of things. But definitely a very, very big issue, and obviously we will unpack it as more of this information comes out. Ohio State made a lot of news this last week because it said that they spent $20 million on the roster for the football team this past year, and I know it's an insane amount of money, but it kind of makes sense. When you look back at what this last year was for Ohio State and you look back at all of the things that broke their way, that all of the things that went their direction, it makes sense that NIL was involved this way. And frankly, I don't know how it was split up. I don't know who got what, but you have to imagine that there was quite a bit of money pushed towards keeping the Denzel Burks, keeping the Jack Sawyers, keeping the JTTs in-house. If you can keep those guys, then you're likely in good shape going into 2024. I have to assume that's where a lot of the money went. And then you have Caleb Downs coming in. And then you have Will Howard coming in and Quinshon Judkins. So there was plenty of money to go around. There's no two ways about that. I don't necessarily know how it was distributed, but overall, Ohio State's playing the game. This is the reality of the sport right now. If you can't play the NIL game, then you're going to have a really tough time competing in this sport. And it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this kind of unfold over the next couple of years as the revenue sharing comes into play. How much does the NIL go down? Does it go down at all? And which of these teams can kind of flex their muscles? Because Ohio State just proven a point that a lot of other schools can whenever they want, really, which is you can put a lot of money into these programs. The Texas of the world, Georgia, Alabama, they can do this pretty much at the drop of the hat. For the most part, they decide not to because it's a little bit of a slippery slope in some ways, but Ohio State decided that 2024 was the year, and they put about every resource they had into it. So it'll be interesting to watch if it was all in vain or if it all really, really meant something at the end of the day. So that'll be awesome to watch. But Billy Napier had a little bit of an update with his Jaden Rashada case. He and the others that are been mentioned in this case again, or have had a case filed against them, have all filed motions to dismiss it. I apologize. I'm getting lost in my words here. But Billy Napier filed motion to dismiss the $13.8 million case, name, image, and likeness case around Jaden Rashada. Obviously, this is something that is going to be really interesting to watch because it'll likely dictate a lot of what happens in the NIL world going forward and how teams go about business and how players go about business. And the big argument that Billy Napier is going after is what he said, whether he offered $13.8 million or not, he did not make him abandon that deal from Miami, which was hypothetically $9.5 million. So he's not necessarily culpable for Jaden Rashada making a not so great choice. And it's kind of an interesting thing. Definitely will be fascinating to watch. The two other people that were involved in this case, Marcus Castro Walker, a Florida staffer from back in the day, and Hugh Hathcock, a very powerful Florida Gators booster, have filed similar motions. So they're trying to get this thing dismissed, and frankly, I think it's going to be. I don't really know. I'm not necessarily a lawyer by any means, but I do think this is going to be one that it probably doesn't really amount to much. I think there is a reality where unless you can really prove that they lied and try to coerce you into not taking the Miami deal, there's not really an argument to be had here. So overall, it's going to be really important to how NIL is dealt with in the future and how, players approach it, teams approach it, how the NCAA approaches it. But overall, I tend to believe they might succeed here, and we'll see what happens, and we'll definitely update you as it kind of comes out. The Rose Bowl made some noise this past week because they want to stay at their same date and time. They want to stay on January 1st at 5 p.m., which would mean they would only be a quarterfinal game for the college football playoff. They would not be semifinal games. And frankly, I'm all in favor of this. They want to stay in line with that Rose Bowl parade on the 1st, and I think that's totally fine. With so many different things changing in the sport and a million different traditions going all over the place, I'm fine with this one staying the same. And I understand people's reaction to this where they saw the Rose Bowl and demanding something and they immediately went into defense mode because the Rose Bowl has been a little bit hoity-toity in the past, has been a little bit full of themselves. Let's just call it that. But I think it's definitely one of those things that overall is probably a win for the sport, just keeping something intact when so many different things are changing. I'm going to take that as a win. And frankly, I could care less if any bowl games are in the playoff, if I'm being totally honest. I would have that totally separate and just have the college football playoff, and you play in the first round, the quarterfinals, and the semifinals. But at the end of the day, if you want to add, the Rose Bowl into it, or the Orange Bowl, or the Cotton Bowl, that's more than fine with me. But it sounds like the Rose Bowl might just be staying as a quarterfinal game going forward, and frankly, I think that's totally fine. I'm very much in favor of that. But the last thing I want to talk about is Mack Brown got a little bit salty in one of his press conferences recently. He was talking about some of the coaches around the sport and some of them saying, when is he going to retire? And pretty much every recruit walking into his office asking the exact same question because everyone else is saying that to him. This is the big time recruiting chip they have over North Carolina is saying, you're committing to a head coach. He's not going to be there next year, or he's not going to be there in 2 years. So it's definitely something that people are using against North Carolina, and Mack Brown was having absolutely none of it. And he said basically they need to worry about themselves because a lot of those guys that have said that have been fired by now. And I absolutely love this energy from Mack Brown. He is someone that deserves more respect than he gets, frankly, in the sport. He's one of the 3 active head coaches that have won a national title, and he should act that way. There's no two ways about that. So I understand this energy from Mack Brown. I understand how frustrating it might be for all of the big-time recruits that he wants on his team to walk into his office and immediately ask when he's leaving. That has to be incredibly frustrating, and frankly, I kind of like that he's fighting back just a little bit. So I would love to see a little bit more of this energy from Mack Brown. I don't know when he's going to wrap it up. Frankly, I've been pretty clear in saying I tend to think it's around that time, but at the end of the day, if he feels like he's coaching good football and UNC not necessarily reaching the heights that they want to reach, but always play really good football every single year. So I think he's still a really good head coach, and I do like a little bit of sass from Mac Brown from time to time. So obviously a very interesting headline there, one that is a little bit more fun than the rest of them, frankly, but it definitely is one that I absolutely laughed at and really enjoyed. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us here. Also, remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered here. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.